there, I'm Janet and welcome back to my channel. It's so great to spend some time with you. Today I'm going to show you how to create the Sympathy card. What makes this card interesting is the use of the white doily. But guess what? It's not a real doily. It's actually a stamped and heat embossed image. The black lace at the bottom is also a heat embossed image, and I'll just tip that so you can pick it up a little bit better. Now I love the stamps in this project, so let me tell you a little bit more about them. First is the doily stamp, and it comes from Prima. It's very detailed. Likewise, the lace stamp comes from Deep Red, and this set has 3 different choices. In today's project I'm using this one. Very nice. Now I love these stamps because they're so versatile. You can use them in any different colors, in every type of project, from sympathy to birthday to thank you. It really doesn't matter. They're just so very, very flexible. So let's take a look at what makes up this card before we go too much further. The card base is 5 by 7. On top of that I've placed a piece of white cardstock. Now don't worry about any of the sizes I'm talking about today because I've put all that detail in the comments section of the video. Now on top of that I've placed the black mat, which creates this double mat effect. And then on top of this I have a Cricut die cut frame. Now it would appear that I've stamped this doily inside of this frame, but actually it's stamped on a separate black circle that's mounted on top of the frame. And this gives me more control over where I put the doily, and if I make an error I only have to restamp the circle instead of starting over, which saves time. Again, as I mentioned before, I've stamped the lace image and heat embossed it with clear embossing powder. And on top of that I've placed this row of pearls and accented it with the 2 Prima flowers, a baker's twine bow, and a large pearl on top of that. Let's take a look at the inside real quick. I've got a piece of white cardstock in here that says, "So sorry for your loss." Now this phrase comes from a Recollections stamp set with all kinds of sympathy related phrases. It doesn't have a name, but I think if you looked it up you could probably find it out there. Alright, so let's go to Design Space now and I'll show you how I created the design for this card from scratch. Okay, here we are in Cricut Design Space, and this is the software I use a lot to put together my designs. You can try lots of different shapes and colors and figure out what you want to do. I've got a lot of this done already. This rectangle represents the black card base. Then this is the black mat that lays on top of the white one, and it's where the white and silver frame is going to go on top of. Then of course we have the black circle, which is where the doily is going to be stamped. So what I need next is my white mat that sits between these 2 black ones. So I'm going to insert a shape here to get that, choose a square. I'm going to click off the lock button, and that will allow me to manipulate the shape of this rectangle in exactly the way I want. And this rectangle is 4.5 by 6.5 inches tall. Then I'm going to change that color from black to white. And now I can put that mat on top and begin to build the card so you can see what it will look like. This mat goes on top, but since it slides underneath the image we have to right click and say move to front. And now I can move it and it will stay on top. Next comes our this frame. I know I'm going to need to also move this to front, and I can put that right on top. And then last is my circle where the doily is stamped. That is 3.75 in diameter. And right click on that to put it on front, and I can verify this way that all the pieces work. And they do. So now to proceed, you can do a couple different things. One is you could simply go and cut all these pieces on the Cricut Explorer. That would be fine. But these 3 rectangles are actually, for me anyway, a lot easier for me to cut just on a regular paper cutter. So that's what I did. I didn't take the time to mess with the Cricut for that. However, I need to cut this circle and this frame, and I can't do that, of course, by hand. So I'm going to shut off, by clicking the eyeballs here, all those other rectangles because I don't want them to cut. However, I do want to save them so that when I save this card pattern I can access it later, I'll have all the pieces with it. I'm ready to hit go now. This shows what it will be on the mat. I'm going to change this to 8.5 by 11 paper so it's representative of how it will actually be done. Same with the white. And now I can see that, and it's ready to go. I hit the go button here. So when I come back, we'll be ready to finish this card. Great, so now that we have the die cuts ready, I can begin to put this card together. First, I'm going to stamp and heat emboss the doily. But before I stamp, I need to prepare my black paper by applying this powder, which is found inside of this little pillow. It breaks the static in the paper so that the embossing powder won't be so inclined to stick in places I don't want it. It will lighten the paper for now, but I'll wipe it off cleanly when I'm done embossing. To get the stamp precisely where I want it, I'm going to use the Misty Press, so I can be sure to get a good image and have the option to stamp as many times as I needed to get a good impression with the ink. I'm placing the black circle in the Misty, and I'm going to apply a little bit of temporary adhesive to the back of it and set it in here. And this will keep it from moving around temporarily while I'm stamping. The circle is almost identical in width to the stamp, so it needs to be carefully aligned to the circle's edges. And once in place, I'll ink this up with Versamark, which is that clear, sticky ink that will hold the embossing powder until it's melted with the heat gun. I'm going to stamp the doily now, but in time lapse so you can see how it's done. I'm always so impressed with how great the white heat embossing powder looks on the black. I mean, the detail in this is really great. As you can see, I'm just taking off the powder that we applied before we heat embossed it, and it's now, nice solid black again. So moving on, we're going to stamp that ribbon or lace at the bottom of the card. And I've already placed my cardstock here. I've tamped it with my heat embossing static powder so that it will stick where I want it to. And then I've taken out the pad and the paper that comes in the Misty, and the reason is because the stamp I'm using now is a rubberized stamp. It's much thicker than the other polymer stamps, so I need that extra room to make this work, and the Misty has accounted for this. So what I'm going to do here is line up my stamp. And what I've done is drew a line here that is about 1.25 inches from the bottom of my edge of the stamp, or edge of the paper, sorry. And then what I did is I made a notation of this with the stamp. I don't know if you can see it, but I've taken an edge all the way around here on both sides so that I know where the line of that stamped image is. Now I want this to look like it is wrapped around the card, just like it were if it were a real piece of lace. So I'm going to use these little marks I made to help me line up on the grid behind it, which, by the way, see my line and the grid matches. This way I can set my stamp about where I want it, make sure it's in the right direction, and align it then to those grid lines here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. Close this up. And now I can stamp this with the Versamark and go ahead and use the embossing powder. Now I'm going to switch this up from the sample that I first showed you. In the sample I use clear, which looks really great in person, but I realize doesn't show up much in the video. So I'm going to do this instead with white so you can really see it. Okay, I've got a pretty good straight impression there, so that really worked out well. I'll take this off of here now. Close this up, move it away, and then I can apply the powder. am back with the card partially put together. I attached the black mat with our laced embossing image below. I applied the frame and then I put the circle with the doily on top. Now for all the gluing here, I used a liquid glue. A simple reason for that is that it gives you some time to make sure that your glued images are where you want them to be. So with glue you can move them around ever so slightly and get it straight or whatever. And it's just, again, kind of a no tears way to get things lined up the way you want before they are adhered permanently. So now we're very close to finishing this card. There's only a couple things we need to do. First thing I'm going to do is apply a row of pearls. And these are Recollections brand again from Hobby Lobby. And it just so happens to be, and I really didn't plan this out, but they actually are exactly long enough for this card. So here's a tip for you card makers out there. This size of black mat is almost perfect for that length. Then we've got these two Prima flowers I'm going to glue on to the bottom edge of that frame, just using again some liquid glue. Now I guess you could use some glue dots for this too, would work just as well, but I'm going to cover up that hole behind the flower on the first one so we don't have that. And then here's my little black baker's twine bow that I made just by hand. Nothing complicated or fancy about that. I'm going to use a glue dot behind that to make it stick. Find that hole, or about the middle of the Prima flower there. Glue that down, and that's going to stay put pretty well. The last sort of finishing touch here is a pearl that I'm just going to sit on the top of the bow in the middle. So kind of set it off and give it a little bit of a finishing touch. We'll shorten up our bow tails here. So that really finishes the front of the card. I think it's a very nice effect here. Pretty pleased with it. And now you can see that by using the white instead of the clear embossing powder, you can get a better picture of how the overall lacy feel of this is. And I think that is equally nice. And I'm pretty pleased with that too. Alright, well thank you for joining me again today. If you liked this video, please remember to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and that way you'll get notices every time I post a new project. Take care, hope to see you soon, and keep crafting.